Hi, everyone. This is Joni McGarry. Thank you so much for tuning in. Today, I have with me Sarah Thompson. She is a certified classical homeopath, and she's going to talk to us about what homeopathy is and how it works and how she uses it to heal her patients. I'm really excited to talk to her because I know nothing about this practice and I've been eager to learn more. But before we get to the show, I want to tell you about something that's helped me in my healthcare experience, and that is crowd health. I have been purchasing my health insurance on the exchange for the past couple years. And as you know, premiums have been sky high. And last year they went even higher. I felt very trapped by it because who wants to be without coverage if you have something catastrophic happen? I mean, no one wants that. It's crazy. But I wanted to get out of the system. And fortunately, I found Crowd Health. Crowd Health is not health insurance, but it's a great alternative to it. It is a crowdfunding platform that enables members to elegantly and easily fund each other's healthcare expenses. It's not for everyone. You have to be under 65 and relatively healthy. Here's how it works. When you join, you pay a monthly fee of $60 to be a member. And then once a month, you're asked to fund somebody else's healthcare expense. You will know upfront what that maximum ask will be every month. And it's very rare that they ask for the maximum. Personally, I'm saving literally over $1,000 a month doing this, and I feel very confident that the crowd will have my back in the event of a medical expense for me. To that point, they have funded 99.9% of all asks to the crowd in the last 5 years that they have been in existence, which is a better track record than most health insurance companies. So check it out at joincrowdhealth.com and use the code JONI, JONI, to get a discount on your first 3 months. I'll put a special link in the show notes. And I'll also link to my interview with the CEO of Crowd Health, Andy Schoonover, if you want to get more information about it. By the end of that interview, I wanted to ask him for a job. It's just such an inspiring and great company. So again, join crowdhealth.com and use code Joni. Check it out. There are no enrollment periods. You can join anytime. You can quit your health insurance and join tomorrow if you want. Their member guide is very easy to read, so you'll know right away if this is something that will work for you. All right, let's get to the show. Hi, Sarah. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me here. I can't wait to talk to you about all things homeopathy. So, welcome.
Joni, thank you. Hi.
Hi, you're coming to me from Maine, yes?
I am.
Is that all right that I said that?
Yeah, no, it's
Gonna out
totally
your
alright.
location. Yeah, it's a state that I used to visit and love very much. And so I wanted to talk to you today about homeopathy. I want to learn about it. So selfishly, this is for me, but I'd also like to bring some listeners along as to what this is, because before I knew anything about it at all, it sounded kind of like a crazy thing to me, so esoteric and, I was always into the allopathic Western medicine model, but, now I'm not so longer, and I wanted to learn about this practice. So, if you wanna share, how you came to it, what you do, what's your, homeopathy 101, if you will?
Absolutely. So isn't it interesting because we have been indoctrinated into what is essentially a pharmaceutical sales funnel that starts before birth in our culture in the West, and for the most part, in most of the world now, that starts, before birth and goes back really, I would argue, roughly to the middle of the 19th century in the US anyway, that has us thinking about the whole idea of what disease is, what health is, and what it means to go from one to the other in this way that is so materialist that we don't even realize we are in that mindset and things could have gone very differently. And we it there was very much a possibility for a window of time in the US where the dominant view of healing could have moved permanently into what I'm going to talk about as a vitalist rather than a materialist understanding, which is what makes this sound so crazy out of the bag because of what we have how we have been taught to think about health. But one of the things that I'll touch on a little bit today after introducing homeopathy is that even that materialist view that we have is not an accurate view of how our current medical system works. And even within the medical system, what does work and the extent to that it works is often much more vitalist than materialist anyway.
Oh,
Uh, but so let me go back to the beginning and introduce homeopathy. Homeopathy is in this kind of what do you call it? Elevator pitch way. It's a over 200-year-old, but not ancient, 200-year-old medical system that is a whole system unto itself in the same way that Ayurveda or Chinese medicine are whole systems into themselves. Um, and it is based on a very ancient idea, which is what we call the law of similars, which goes way, way back. And what Hahnemann, Samuel Hahnemann, in the early 19th century, so he was born in the late mid 18th century and then died in the mid 19th century. What he figured out as a medical doctor, so he was a medical doctor, conventional medical doctor. He was a genius and polymath, and he was practicing medicine, and he came to the conclusion that the practice of medicine, and he was a German physician, was barbaric and destructive and appalling. And so he left the practice of medicine and he became a translator of medical texts. And he was translating a medical text. And this is the truth of where this comes from. He was translating a medical text on the medicine, which is what quinine is made from, cinchona bark, for malaria. He was translating this text, and as he was reading this text, the text said that the reason that quinine was effective for treating what at that time was called intermittent fever, which is what we now call malaria, is because it was bitter and astringent. That was what the text said. And he read that and he thought and wrote, this doesn't make any sense because there are other substances that are both bitter and astringent that aren't at all effective for managing intermittent fever. So this can't be right. So why is it that quinine appears to work to at least suppress intermittent fever? So he performed an experiment. And in performing this experiment, he planted the seeds for what actually would end up becoming the original random controlled trials. No one did scientific experiments in this way before he did them in medicine. And he took the substance. He took the drug as a healthy person. He took quinine and then he observed his symptoms. And what he discovered was that when he took quinine, when he took cinchona bark, it gave him, and he must have taken quite a bit of it, it gave him the symptoms of malaria. And he thought, I think this is why.
do you think that's what he expected?
I don't know what he expected. I don't know that he wrote about what he expected.
Huh.
Um, I but he was an experimenter. I mean, really, in those days, there was no difference between what we call chemistry and what we call alchemy. It was just you would, heat things up or bash them around or consume them and figure out what they did.
So
And
he discovered that it gave him the symptoms. So how did that lead to his aha moment about homeopathy?
so that was his aha moment because then he got better and didn't have those symptoms anymore. And so then he started doing these other experiments, using other substances in that way and discovering what the symptoms that would result from these substances was. But he also and it worked. He discovered that he could then give these substances to people who had those symptoms and get some kind of curative response. But you can only do that with a fairly limited range of substances, right? Because medicinal substances are, to some degree, almost by definition, poisonous in some way.
Mhm.
Even if they don't cause severe damage, they're triggering a process in the system. And that was the idea of the stronger similar disease, which is what the similar remedy is. So we had to figure out, well, how can I do this in a way that doesn't cause damage? And because as a scientist, as a chemist, as an alchemist, he then started messing around with, well, how do I reduce the amount of the substance and still get this healing benefit? And he figured out that, in fact, if he did this process of diluting substances, so grinding them or triturating them, diluting them, shaking them around, which is shaking them in glass, agitating them in glass, that's what they used in the laboratory, that he could not only could he continue to elicit a symptom response in a person who did not have symptoms himself, or what he called provers, that comes from the German prüfen, um,
So somebody who had no symptoms, and he could elicit a symptom in them of the disease he was studying
right, of the
using.
substance was that he was studying,
Okay.
uh, with this minute dose. And he found that he could get a more powerful healing response when he did this process. So counterintuitively, the less he used, if it went through this process of both dilution and agitation, he would get a better response. And he started to find ways to heal diseases that had no other means of healing. The most famous of which, and what really broke homeopathy into the mainstream, was the great cholera epidemic in the late 18th century in Europe. And there was really no way to treat cholera at the time, and Hahnemann figured out a way of treating cholera using homeopathic remedies that worked, and people were recovering and surviving from cholera. And so then he had not only his experimental studies, but also these case studies. And all these physicians started to take notice and say, well, maybe we want to follow this guy. Maybe we want to see what this guy is doing. So that's the practice, and it came into then there were some German physicians in the waves of immigration to the US in the 18th century who, came to the US and brought this study. One of the first, the original American homeopath, a man named Constantine Herring, he got into homeopathy as a skeptic. He went to prove that it was not real, and then he got sick, and by mail, like, Kahneman was the original, telehealth. By letter, he got a prescription, and it saved his life. A homeopathic remedy, ultra dilute, none of the original substance. He took this remedy, which would have been on a little sugar pill, essentially, or
Mhm.
a liquid, and it saved his life. He
Now, when
fully
you say
recovered.
just so a couple
Yeah.
of things, because it's counterintuitive, because with Western medicine, we see like a dose response, and the higher the dose, the bigger the response
Mhm.
until toxicity, or maybe it's all toxicity.
Right.
But when you say none of the original substance, so when
Mhm.
you dilute it, so well, I don't want to get into the weeds on this because
Yeah.
I want to know a little bit more of the trajectory. But when you dilute it so much, when you say none of the original substance, is there indeed none of the original substance? Like, let's say with quinine, have you diluted it so much that it's not discernible in the remedy?
Yes. So I wanna speak to something you said at the beginning of that sentence and then answer your question.
Okay.
It's not even actually true that in regular pharmacology, more equals a greater response. We've known since certainly since the early part of the last century, and definitely since the middle part of last century, that there is such a thing as
Mhm.
the Arndt-Schultz curve, where less elicits one response, more elicits an opposite response, biphasal responses. There have been studies that demonstrate that microbes with certain antibiotics in vitro, so in a petri dish, can actually at one level have a suppressive response and at a different level have a stimulative response. So even in conventional pharmacology, the idea that this curve is somehow linear, that the second derivative is flat, isn't true, even though that's what we're led to believe, and
We
even
sure
though that's
think that. Yeah, that's how we think things work. More is
yeah.
better.
And that's a lot of how prescriptions work now. I mean,
Mhm.
the only real framework for it tends to be body weight now, and
Right.
then, you know, just kind of giving more and more and more. And my own personal story of that is just a little funny aside is, and I will tell my story briefly, but that when I was in the hospital, I was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia, I was 33.
And you were not a homeopath at that time, correct?
No, but I was very naturally minded. I was
Mhm.
not into conventional medicine at all. I was living in the woods. I was doing the Weston A. Price diet thing. I had 2 little babies that I'd had at home. It was really a startling, diagnosis, and I remember and I had went through a process of conventional treatment, got fully better, and then relapse, end up going through a bone marrow transplant, and at one point in that process, the transplant specialist, who was my oncologist for that phase of things, said to me, "Because you are so young and healthy, we can give you a higher amount of chemo without being afraid we're gonna kill you." So that is how they were thinking about it, right? And what those are what we call heroic doses, which was the kind of medicine that in the 18th century and 19th century, the heroic dosing of things like mercury and arsenic were considered the way you do medicine, and that's what Hahnemann was rejecting, and sometimes people will say, "Well, sure, of course, but that's not how we do medicine now, so this is a straw man, this is not a proper framework for thinking about the debate in medicine." But in fact, it is exactly still how we do medicine, and the idea that Hahnemann was observing that there was a theory about quinine in this case, but that there was a theory about medicine that didn't actually match the observation in a series of patients that you would call hypothesis, experimentation, conclusion, hypothesis, but just making up a story. And that was not a way to actually restore people to health, which is the fundamental first principle of homeopathy. So, but to go back to your question, after what we call the 12C, 12 centesimal dilution, which is a dilution and then a succussion, which is a high intensity agitation against a hard surface. They do this in the pharmacies where they make it. They actually use a mechanical arm uh, to agitate the vial, and it changes the structure of the water, which changes the relationship of the essentially the imprint of the original substance onto the water molecule. That's not scientific. We don't know what's going on there, and there are homeopathic chemists who study this in the laboratory, and they can show using reagents that something is happening, they can show that different things are happening with different substances, but the mechanism of action is not something we know, and Hoffman was sa he said, "Not only can we not know, but we don't need to know because it isn't about what it's about is what kind of clinical results are we getting."
Mhm.
So as we've gotten more sophisticated with the science, people are interested in this problem. They are playing around with it in the laboratory. But his basic understanding was that when you dilute things past what we call the 12th centesimal dose, 12th centesimal potency, you do in fact you cross Avogadro's number. There are no original molecules of the substance left. And when that happens, there's an inflection point in the way that the remedy reacts with the body, and we get a much more dynamic healing response at these higher potencies.
This
Sound
is and yeah, it does. It sounds absolutely nuts because it's a concept that somebody had, you can't just put it under the microscope and say, "Yes, this has changed." And so that's I think why a lot of people have a hard time thinking that this isn't just woo-woo.
totally.
So they're like, "I'm not gonna that's just craziness because all they're basically giving me is water that's been shaken around."
Mhm.
And, so that's that was my first reaction. It's like, "How can this possibly be?" But then I know smart people like you who will tell me that this works, and I believe you. So, I mean, that you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's the tension around this compared to Western medicine that clearly often does not work, but yet we still believe it works because they've trotted out this pseudoscience or sometimes science, whatever, or proof,
Mhm.
and we're indoctrinated into it. So I find this fascinating. So please go on.
Yeah,
So
and I'm not going to go woo on this and say that it just works and it's magic. I actually am going to talk about how we can think about this in a way that I think grounds it in
mhm,
our understanding of other mechanisms.
great.
And you use this word pseudoscience. It's actually a really great word because we're given a paradigmatic framework for understanding how what we call conventional Western medicine works that isn't really true. But because it fits into our way of thinking, enlightenment thinking that we do, we accept it, even though, for instance, the idea that the mechanism of action of a drug is that you take this little white, uh, you know, pill
Tablet,
that you're
yeah.
given, and that somehow that goes into your stomach and then goes into your bloodstream and attaches to every receptor on every cell, and that's what causes the mechanism of action, or that it all goes to one organ system and attaches to every receptor on every cell. It's We know that's not how it works, and yet because we don't really know how it does work, the 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 explanations that we have that fit into our preconceived notions of how the world works in general, mm, we give it a buy.
Well, I
But
think that's true about a
yeah,
lot of things, particularly when there's so much advertising money behind the machine that
right.
is producing these things. Like, I think about, SSRIs, for instance. I In a million years before, like, would never have thought about that they like, "Oh, you have a serotonin deficiency,"
Mhm.
and so they must go I didn't even think about it that the, drug would go right to that place where your imagined serotonin deficiency would be and didn't go everywhere else in your body or do something. I
Yeah.
never thought about it because we aren't invited to think about that. So, yeah, we do have a construct of how the world works, and it is supported by a lot of advertising money. I just wanted to put that in there
And
'cause
it absolutely
it's a
is, and that
powerful, powerful thing.
and that's a lot of the history of the medical system in the United States as it currently stands, which is that in the in 1844, the American homeopaths established the American, uh, Institute of Homeopathy, I believe, which was their medical association. So they were all MDs at that time. They weren't lay homeopaths. I'm not an MD.
Mhm,
Um, they were medical doctors. They were all conventionally trained as medical doctors, and a lot of them originally coming from Europe, where the medical training was more rigorous at the time. They established their American Homeopathic Society as a professional association, and at that time, as now, the state medical societies were the ones that handled medical licensure, and these MDs were MDs, and they had medical licenses to state medical societies. But the AMA didn't exist. The
mm.
AMA is not wasn't, it's not a licensing board, and now it's mostly just the AMA itself is not hugely relevant anymore. They support themselves by owning the licenses for medical coding, but there's, of course, the AAP and the ACOG and all these other medical associations that now are hugely influential. And so the conventional doctors were feeling very threatened by the homeopaths, because if we remember that people were being given, mercury till their teeth fell out, and that was kind of how they were doing medicine then, that people were interested in homeopathy and started hiring the homeopaths, and the homeopathic consultants were able to charge higher fees. They had more vibrant practices. They were kind of putting the conventional MDs out of business.
Because the results were better and less harmful.
Because the result both. Right, exactly. The results were better, they were less harmful, and the thing that really burned some buttons was that, uh, you could buy a home kit. You In Philadelphia, you could buy a home remedy kit, a little booklet for how to use it, and you could go out in your Conestoga wagon onto the frontier, and if your child got whooping cough or scarlet fever, you could treat that at home with medicine that
Without
worked
and without paying somebody.
without paying somebody.
Wow.
And so the Allopaths felt pretty threatened by this. They formed the AMA 3 years later to with the express purpose of creating what they called the consultation clause, which was an attempt
Mm.
to exclude homeopaths from medical licensure. So that's
Even
a story as old
so
as time.
even though they
Mhm.
were all MDs,
Mhm.
the allopathic MDs who rejected homeopathy now wanted to exclude homeopathy as a
Exactly.
part of medical practice.
Exactly. So they wanted to say that if you were a homeopath, or if you were consulting with a homeopath, with your patient, you're an MD and you want to ask a homeopath what their opinion is because your patient's not doing well, even that would be a disqualifying criteria
Tale
criterion.
as
So
old as time.
a tale as old as time. And this was neck and neck. The courts were not on board with this. There was a lot of debate. The public was not on board with this. That even the New York Times ran editorials saying these doctors would rather see a patient die than get a good consultation from a homeopath. It wasn't the mainstream view wasn't to box out the homeopaths. This was entirely internal to the industry. Also like now. And so
And
this
tell me again, what year was this? Because I would love to look up some source material just
The
to read
the
it.
the book to read, which the Brownstone Institute republished a couple of years ago, it had gone mostly out of print. There's a 4-volume series by an author named Harris Coulter, Coulter. He wrote a 4-volume series called Divided Legacy. If you buy volume 4 on Amazon, you actually have to buy it in 2 parts because Amazon has a not page number limit, so there's technically 5, but it's 4 volumes.
Mhm.
Volume 3 covers the period of the formation of the AMA, and it lays out and Harris Coulter really did his homework. He read every minute from every medical association meeting. It is all in there. The AMA was formed in 1847. The American Institute of Homeopaths was formed in 1844. I believe those are the numbers. But it wasn't until around the time of the Civil War, shortly thereafter, that really more like 1880s even, I think, if I remember correctly. The pharmaceutical companies, which had been around, some of them are very, very old. I think Merck is a very, very old company. Uh, they were chemical companies. They had these went through the period of patent medicine and the drugs with had no that didn't have any you weren't able to know what was in them. And then
So you're
also
saying they're proprietary formulations.
the proprietary formulations and the snake oil and all that, um, but also chemical pharmaceuticals created in the laboratory.
Mhm.
The pharmaceutical companies realized that the only way they were gonna be able to sell this stuff was if they could get doctors to be the marketing arm, the sales arm, because that's where people were going to even if you could go to the pharmacy and buy anything you wanted off the shelf, the only reason people were gonna buy these things is if their medical doctors told them to take them.
Mhm.
But homeopathic remedies are really, really cheap, and they don't make any money for anybody because they're
And and also they're natural. They're natural substances, is that correct?
so yes, and they
Okay.
are all made from original source substances, so a lot of them are natural because a lot of substances in the world are natural,
Mhm.
but we have pharmaceutical remedies. I mean, we have homeopathic remedies made from all sorts of, man-made
Okay.
things. We have, homeopathic remedies that are made from pharmaceutical drugs that some homeopaths will sometimes use those. We have some that are made from vaccines. Some people find that those can help reverse the effect of vaccine damage. It's there's different ways of
Okay.
approaching
But
this.
they're not patented medicines. They're
They're
not
not
they're
patented.
not highly profitable
No.
substances. Okay, go
However,
go on. Okay, go on.
pharmaceutical companies know that and know they work, so there are patented formulations, and there are pharmaceutical company laboratories who are always working on trying to create nanomedical, nanomolecular, and ultramolecular medicines
Which,
that
meaning highly, highly dilute
highly, highly
medicines
dilute
that not
to
like
patent.
nanoparticles, but nano
Right.
meaning very, very small in this
Yes.
context. Okay.
Yeah, or even ultramolecular
Mhm.
is when there's none left, and, to patent them, to make these
Sure.
drugs.
Of
S
course.
so this is they know. And it was the pharmaceutical companies could pay the AMA, and they could run ads in the AMA journals, and they could put people on the editorial board, and they could write infomercials for the journals, and the AMA could make money off of this. Whereas the equivalent for the homeopaths, it didn't work because there wasn't any money there.
Mhm.
So they were neck and neck for a long time, but once the pharmaceutical money came in, by the time the Flexner Report happened in
And
1910, which is
what is the Flexner Report for people who might not
yes.
know?
So by the time, the Rockefeller and Carnegie and the big oil barons got behind the idea of promoting a having Abraham Flexner do an analysis of medical schools in the United States and determine that most of them were not uh, to essentially limit the number of medical schools and to focus the practice of medicine on pharmaceutical and at that time, um, petroleum-based pharmaceutical medicines. This was the science.
Mhm.
In order to eliminate the competition, all these other medical schools had to be disaccredited so that those graduates could not be licensed medical doctors.
So before that, were all of the medical schools, including the ones that were producing MD homeopaths,
Mhm.
they was there an accreditation system and they were accredited or they had accreditation and then the Flexner Report changed the standards, or did they say only doctors who are from accredited universities and we're gonna provide that accreditation? Do I have that right? Which way
That's a
was it?
great question. I don't know the details. The medical boards, state by state, were they were able to determine what schools they would accept,
Okay.
graduates from, and so I don't know who managed the accreditation, but the state medical associations were the ones to issue the licenses.
Okay, and so after the Flexner Report, they adopted the recommendations.
Exactly. So they adopted this much narrower recommendation. And what that did was it closed a whole bunch of medical schools. It drove up the cost of tuition. It really damaged the rural areas. There were no longer physicians because people couldn't afford to practice. A lot of doctors used to practice, pro bono in rural areas. They couldn't afford to if they were having to go to these medical schools. It boxed out women, it boxed out minorities who have always, women in particular have been homeopaths since
How did it box out women?
because those other schools were not the schools that were accepting women and minorities into their programs weren't the schools that were getting accredited.
There you go. Okay.
Obviously there's nuance there too,
Sure,
but
of course.
the consequence of this was that a lot of competition was eliminated and medicine became thoroughly ensconced as, white men prescribing pharmaceutical drugs.
And
That's what
so
medicine turned into.
would you say then the Flexner Report was used as a tool by these large corporations and wealthy backers to
Mhm.
change medicine so that it became a funnel for I mean,
Yes.
not all of it, 'cause I happen to think that there are still some really profoundly good things about Western medicine. I mean, if I break
Yeah,
my
well
leg, I'm
mhm,
going to, somebody who knows how to set my leg.
right.
So but at that time, you would say that the Flexner Report was a tool for that.
Yeah, I wanna speak to both those things. So,
Okay.
the Flexner Report was the end of this arc of the pharmaceutical companies, being able to help the AMA get enough power, have enough money to have enough power to be part of this process because things like that had been tried before and had not been successful. They had not been able to box out the competition.
Okay.
Um, so, yes to that. I do want to speak to this other point that you made, which is that one of the real misfortunes of this whole thing is that every discipline benefits from the dynamic tension and friction of having to debate and defend its practices in the heterodox arena of
Mhm.
ideas. At the
And
end of the day, we have this job to do, and it's to help patients. And if the homeopaths are completely boxed out of the debate, then neither what they Hahnemann invented the word allopath, but neither the allopaths or the homeopaths truly get to benefit from making their disciplines better by
Right.
having to confront the weaknesses that the other disciplines can bring in. And Hahnemann didn't even consider I don't think he even necessarily considered things like surgery to be, strictly speaking, the practice of medicine. He definitely thought those were in the realm of you that's a surgical problem and you have to
Mhm.
go get that fixed. Like, you have a mechanical issue.
Yeah,
You've got something in your eye. Um,
gotta have it removed, yes.
right.
It is mechanical.
That's in the way. And even when we look at something like the healing of a broken bone, we think of it as a mechanical process because you've got to go in and you've got this problem and you have to get it set. But what that it's still a fundamentally vitalist process because the actual healing of that is the body's dynamic response
Right.
to the need. And what we do with a surgery or a bone setting is to try to create the conditions in the body where that vital response can be optimized to the highest functional outcome. And that I mean, I've had a bone marrow transplant. I know what it's like to be in that system. I know why I chose it. I know what I needed about it. Um, what I think gets lost in the shuffle is that that aspect of the medical of medicine is, for the most part and by design, it's suppressive. It's meant to either stop a process that's going badly, whether we think of that in microbial terms,
Like an infection or a yeah.
whether we think about it as a bad guy or we think about it as a cancerous tumor or whatever it is, that process is either designed to stop something that we don't wanna see
Mhm.
or to make go something that we're not seeing that we want to have go in that process. And so these two, that's what that system does. But the problem is that by completely abrogating the language of healing, which legally the medical system does, if you read the definition of the practice of medicine, which the definition of the practice of medicine at the state level is what determines which the medical boards license MDs. Only MDs can practice medicine. The state medical boards are allowed to define the practice of medicine into law pretty much because they're the ones who write it.
Right.
Um, what that means is that it's a felony for anyone who doesn't have that process, that MD, to, for pay, say they do any of those things. So, I can tell you to eat chicken soup when you're sick. But if I were to say to you, um, if you were to pay me for a consultation and I were to say to you, um, "I cure XYZ thing with chicken soup," I would now be practicing medicine without a license.
Mm.
That's the level of abrogation of the freedom of people to heal and to be agents of healing that has happened in the medical system. And so the reason people don't trust it is that it's it has a thing that it can do, but it refuses to say there's anything anything it can't do or can't do well. It just doesn't let anybody else play. And so, one of the things that conventional medical system does really well is acute injury
Mhm.
and suppression of uh, emergent organic processes in acutes. So, for instance, a heart attack, a stroke, those are actually acute expressions of underlying chronic conditions, but you
But
are
it's
in an
it can be an emergency, so
right.
that's right.
Medical system does that so well, but it does not do chronic disease well at all. But it won't let anybody else do chronic disease unless they wanna jump through those hoops, and we can't talk about it that way, and
Well, and
so
one might
yeah,
wonder if one were cynical that if they can't do chronic disease well, they wouldn't want anyone else to do it because chronic disease leads to more business, more treatments,
Oh, yeah.
lifetime pharmaceuticals, lifetime doctor's appointments.
Absolutely.
And again, my husband is an allopathic doctor,
Mhm.
right? He practiced medicine for decades. He's a radiologist, so it's a slightly different thing. And I think that there are really good people in medicine, but you're
Mhm.
talking about a very big structural problem. Um, which brings me, like, when you talked about, the way that the laws are now and the way that our mindset is now, you can't really have a coming together of all these disciplines to mix and match and to elevate, like, each other and use all the tools at your disposal.
Mhm.
Um, so how do you practice then in that environment? Um, how does that work with you as a certified classical homeopath
Mhm.
in a state that is putting out MD licensures? Like,
Yeah.
how does that all work?
Before I answer that question, I wanna go back just really briefly to
Sure.
what I think of as the elephant in the room in homeopathy, which is, yeah, but still, what about the minimum dose? And which is that
Yeah, you
ultramolecular
you
dose.
take this where you need to go because
Yeah.
you know so much, and I don't wanna miss any of it.
And even when you think about radiology, right? If we need radiology, what are we dealing with? Are we dealing with a material thing? And when we're dealing with disease, are we dealing with a material thing? I mean, I would make the case, Hahnemann would make the case, a lot of contemporary homeopaths would make the case that what's going on in allopathic medicine that works is still, for the most part, driven by homeopathic principles because for instance, you use carcinogens to treat cancer. What is it that's actually working there? Is it a mechanism of action that's materialist, or is it the stronger similar disease? Do we have a way of distinguishing between the 2? And so in when you think about the origins of chronic disease. I like to take this out to a place that most people can totally understand, which is the physiological experience, the physiological change that happens in your body when you see something funny, when you watch a sad movie, when you listen to a beautiful piece of music. There is a physiological change that happens that is not a consequence of any material thing that has entered your body. And yet you have experienced a physiological change. We experience a physiological change with stress,
Mm.
even when we are not immediately physically threatened by something, we just experience a stressful thought.
Mhm.
I do a whole thing. I teach a class, and I'll talk about that before we get off the call. But in one of the classes I teach, I do this whole political thing. I talk about politics, talk about the last election, talk about Trump, and I talk about Harris, and I talk about Clinton, Hillary Clinton, and Biden, all these people. And I do this thing, and then we get to this point, and I say, "You're all having a physiological reaction right now."
Whatever your point of view is, you're having
Right.
one, right?
Everyone's having a
Yeah.
physiological response to this. None of these people are in the room. None of them are of immediate physical threat or benefit to any of us. We're all having a physiological response. So we totally understand that. We totally
Mhm.
understand that when we are in the company of people we love and enjoy, that we feel edified and elevated and our physical health improves. So these things make perfect sense to us. Homeopathy really just puts it in a basically puts it in a bottle in a way. And but even physiologically, when we're talking about chronic disease, if I have somebody in my practice and they are describing the symptoms of an autoimmune disease like IBS or lupus or allergies, whatever,
Mhm.
if I have someone in my practice describing any kind of chronic issue, if we dial back and dial back and dial back to when did that issue first start, where might it have come from, what happened before it, all of that, it's immediately evident that when we're talking about that kind of disease state, for the most part, with the exception of some things, like we might talk about Lyme disease, we might talk about chronic fatigue that someone had after having mono or whatever. But
Mhm.
for the most part, we can recognize that uh, there either never was a material ideology,
Mhm.
or if we would argue for a material ideology, it's no longer there.
Well, let me just interrupt you. What do you mean by material ideology? Like an agent, an outside agent that caused that condition?
Yes, so the idea that when we think mechanistically about medicine, it would only make sense if we were thinking that mechanistic medicine was the way that medicine worked, to think that the source had to be mechanistic too. When you break
Right.
your arm, there's a clear mechanistic problem.
Right.
You go get a mechanistic solution. But lupus doesn't have a mechanical beginning point where one day there was nothing and then the next day
You had lupus.
agent came in from
Right.
outside, and if you could remove agent, it would be gone.
Right.
So, it's not a leap intellectually to recognize that any medicine that would cure, any any remedy that would evoke a healing response for a condition like that, to actually match what we would call the mechanism of that, would need to be as subtle and dynamic as immaterial as the actual origins. If your state of disease comes out of, for instance, an emotional trauma, how would a physical solution be the solution?
Well, it's like apples and oranges.
Right. So it's not, I wouldn't try to explain how this works because I don't know how it works. I don't think anyone knows how it works. I mean, Luc Montagnier, before he died, was the Nobel uh, laureate for his work with HIV.
Mhm.
Um, Became very interested in homeopathy and totally convinced of it and got himself made persona non grata for that reason.
Yeah, so
But
it's hard to have divergent views
you
in a
cannot be
profession.
heterodox.
Yeah.
But so it's not that we need to pretend to know things we don't know or make up fuzzy language for things we don't know, but it's not illogical to think that this is a mechanism of disease, of eliciting a vital healing response in the body, when we know that the mechanism of eliciting a disease response in the body is really not understood at all, let alone
Right.
poorly understood.
So let me just say, so say I came to you and I have a chronic disease state of like that,
Yeah.
and I've been suffering from it more or less, say for 10 years or whatever.
Mhm.
How do you as a homeopath approach that, and what happens?
Yeah.
How do you work with a patient? How do you and when I look at homeopathy versus, say, some kind of Western medicines, it seems like the homeopath has to really be intuitive and discerning
Mhm.
because you're really treating the whole patient in front of you in a way that many Western doctors maybe don't anymore. So tell me what happens. I come to you with this thing that wasn't evoked by a causal agent. How do
Yes.
we proceed? How does it work?
Right. Yeah, and it would be the same thing also if you did have what we would call a virus or bacterial infection or whatever, it would just be simpler. Um, but yes, so from 99% of what I see has some kind of chronic aspect to it for sure. The way that I practice and the way most homeopaths practice in the West, and there are different, it's the most popular alternative system of medicine in the world, is practiced differently in other places, but uh, we do a full intake. So in the case of a chronic of some magnitude, where we might be looking at 2 hours of you just explaining to me, and I'm asking questions to understand exactly what are your symptoms. I
Mhm.
don't care if it's called IBS or lupus or migraines or whatever. I care in the sense that I know what those things generally mean,
Mhm.
what the common symptoms are, but I wanna hear what what are your symptoms? What other symptoms happen at the same time? What's the history of evolution of those symptoms? I'm looking at the mental, emotional, physical, spiritual plane, and I wanna understand, all right, every person has a means of dynamic response that's happening, and it shows up on all these different levels. And I'm eliciting enough information, just by asking questions and then you're just talking, to be able to then step back and analyze that and say, "What is the red thread here? What patterns do I see coming, in a bunch of different directions here that all line up?" These patterns map together. And then we understand remedies the exact same way. We study them the exact same way, and we look at what those patterns how those patterns map, and, we overlay one on the other, look at the remedy that I like to use the language of narrative. So the vital force is telling a story. The story that the vital force is telling, the language it's using is that these are your symptoms. This is the story of the disease state, which only exists in the individual. It's just a manifestation of the vital expression in the disease state. That's a story.
Mhm.
We find a remedy that tells a similar story.
And let me just jump in. When you say the remedies, is there like one toolkit of remedy available to homeopaths that you know about, or is it and you mix and match those things, or is there an evolving library of them?
So in there are there are uh, there are thousands of homeopathic remedies that are like this one that I just lifted up in front of the camera. This is Stannum metallicum, so that's tin is the
Mhm.
original material in that, and then this is a 12C. This is the 12th centesimal dose, and these are little pellets. In the homeopathic pharmacopoeia, strictly speaking, in what we call classical homeopathy, which is I'm classically trained,
Mhm.
and I have a classical certification, which is this way of practicing that you every remedy is either one substance or one compound, but the original substance is the original substance. You're not mixing and matching them after the fact. The original substance goes through the entire process, and that's the remedy.
Mhm.
And then, and we have a number of pharmacies. There are homeopathic pharmacies are overseen by what we call the Homeopathic Pharmacopoeia of the US, which is actually part of the FDA. So
Hmm.
there's a regulatory aspect to this. They have to be what they say they are. They have to be manufactured the way they say they are. It's not like the supplement industry at all. It's quite strict.
Well, the
And
supplement industry is not well regulated. I used
right.
to work in it. I know these things.
Yes, this is a highly regulated in that
Right.
sense, and there are major pharmacies. There are several in the US, there are a lot in Europe, there are a lot in India, a good one in Italy.
Mhm.
Um, you buy your remedies from a reputable source,
Mhm.
and they come in different forms, but that's all standardized, so you know exactly what it is. And we give in that what we call the classical training, a single remedy at a time. So then you are taking one thing one way in one system, whatever we determine makes sense for you. And we're just looking at the response to that, making adjustments accordingly just to the response to that single remedy. If your remedy is Stannum metallicum is the only homeopathic remedy you're going to take until we understand how the body is responding to Stannum metallicum. Maybe we
Mhm.
need a higher potency, lower potency, more doses, whatever, but we're not changing course until we get that conversation between the vital force and the remedy is happening, and we get that information through the change of your symptoms.
And how so okay, so I'm the patient, I've come to you with
Mhm,
chronic disease. You've taken my intake, you're listening to the symptoms as the expression of vital force. You've come up with a remedy and I start taking it. How long does that like I think people are so impatient. They want to take something, they want it to be,
mhm,
which is interesting because a lot of these things that you take pharmaceutically, they don't really work, but people stay with it or try something else. How long is the process, if
mhm,
something's like chronic?
yeah, and it's funny, so the word patient is one who suffers, and the word patience has the same root. And in our
Long
medical
suffering.
yeah, in our medical system, one of the
Mm,
things that people have been trained into is this idea that, you you should only be patient in the medical system if you are suffering the ill effects of a pharmaceutical process. Otherwise, you should expect an instant result. So,
interesting.
if you're going through oncology, it's might kill you, and you've gotta be patient through that process. But if you are dealing with pain, you need an instant result from your painkiller, it doesn't work. And if you don't respond in the way to the pharmaceutical drug that they expect you to respond, then you are actually the failure, right? You're either treatment resistant or you
Right.
have, a treatment failure, which is
Well, because
fascinating.
they are treating the symptom and you are trying to discern the
Right.
underlying condition. So I didn't mean to get you off track with that. So,
No, but it's a good question.
yeah. So you have do you call your is it a client? Is it well, I guess you don't have to call them anything. It's a
I say
human.
client mostly, sometimes we say patient internally, but because that is medical language, I'm
Mhm,
more likely to say client.
mhm,
And the timeline goes both ways. The I am looking for some kind of response pretty readily. Now,
mhm,
that response can be really subtly. Part of my job is to understand what it is.
mhm,
Sometimes there can be what we call an aggravation. So symptoms can get more activated before they go the other way. We try to minimize that, but we actually do look for it because it's also information.
mhm,
Uh, and then in homeopathy, the rule is exactly like as fast as we can go, but no faster.
mhm,
So when we're dealing with a long-standing chronic, what I'm usually looking at is I would like as much as possible within a few months to really see some amelioration of any really disruptive symptoms. But we can be looking at, you know, a month of recovery phase for even a year of disease state, but it's lumpy. Sometimes I'm in touch with the client really, really intensively for several months. Sometimes, and I have clients that I meet with every month. Things are going well, they continue to go well. We move into what other symptoms are showing up. I do a lot of coaching into this larger space of what does it mean to heal? Because
mhm,
usually when people are wanting to heal, they're not just wanting to heal their bodies. There's more that wants to heal and which isn't even always readily apparent. But I usually say that after 3 months, we really wanna be seeing some movement, and then we make a decision from there, and,
mhm.
I'm at the point in my life where I started homeopathic care actually was in the hospital when I first met the homeopath, so my whole story starts
When you were acutely ill.
when I was acutely ill. I was introduced to a homeopath, after I had checked into the hospital. And so that the first time I ever worked with a homeopath was, well, it was, September of 2010. But, and then I was a 4-year process for me. I had a bone marrow transplant in July of 2014. Um, and I would say that it was probably, uh, where are we now? 2026, where I'm in absolutely the best health of my life. I mean, I was never in health like this, even as a young person. I would say it was probably 8 years before I felt like I was fully out of pretty much all the stuff I'd been carrying around my whole life. Um, but it wasn't
And
like that was 8 years of feeling sick. It was
right.
just that there was kind of this moment where I thought, everything is really gone, and I'm actually a different person now.
And you credit this to the whole homeopathic process during that time.
That part of my healing, yes. I
Mhm,
credit my healing to the homeopathic process. I absolutely believe that conventional medicine saved my life. I had acute myeloid leukemia, which is extremely fast-moving cancer. Um, I did not have a catastrophic infection at the time, which is usually how people discover
mhm,
AML. I just actually thought I had mono. I was just really, really depleted. They caught it randomly on a blood test. I happened to go to, the doctor to get a blood test because my younger son was my infant I had an infant at the time, was seeing
wow.
the osteopath for he was having trouble teething.
Mhm,
I just happened to be there. I ordered a blood test. It was a cash clinic
because you were tired.
because I was tired. I thought, "Maybe I
Yeah,
have mono."
yeah.
Um, this is how I got that diagnosis, and so
Wow.
at that time I simply did not have, on a number of levels, at a 4-year-old as well, I did not have the resources internally or externally to go on whatever kind of vision quest might have been the alternative.
She had 2 kids.
Yeah, even if that had worked. So for
Right.
me, that suppression was essential. That
Yeah.
process was moving faster than I could outrun it.
Yeah.
But what I had to then understand about the system, and this is when I talk to one of the things I talk about a lot, I give presentations on this, do workshops on it, is talking about interfacing these between these 2 systems, because we all have to sometimes.
Yes, and I'm very interested in that and what the
Right.
differences are, like, especially the alternative medicine treatment, like integrative medicine, functional
Yeah,
medicine, but go on. I wanna get to
exactly.
that.
That these systems have actually they have different objectives, and when we're inside them, we have to understand, how do I align my expectations and objectives up with what this system can do, have reasonable expectations for it, and know when I'm at the limits of what it can do for me. So in what we'll call materialist medicine, the the mandate for medical doctors is the preservation of life at all cost, the ticking of the clock. That's their job. And they measure that through metrics, number go up, number go down. Vitalist system has, at least in my field, but I think fundamentally in vitalism, this is the idea, is the goal of the restoration of health.
Mhm.
These things are not always the same, but there
Mhm.
are times when you can't get to the restoration of health unless you do some suppression of symptoms. It's sort of like the gangrenous limb, you gotta cut it off.
Right. If you don't keep the patient alive, you can't restore their
You
health.
can't restore the health. So I think what ends up happening is that people will feel they'll get in one or the other kind of vertical and feel really boxed in. And sometimes they can't play together, but they can play in and out of each other. So, for instance, I might have somebody who comes to me in advance of conventional cancer treatment. We might work on some things in advance of conventional cancer treatment, but that it still makes sense for them to go through conventional cancer treatment.
But maybe
I
you can make them healthier and more ready to
Right.
accept that treatment. Yeah.
And then I can work with them on side effects from that treatment.
Mhm.
And then after that, we can switch to focusing on recovering from the suppression of the treatment and then actually addressing the underlying disease, which we didn't get a chance to address before the body went into a state of organic pathology that we couldn't outrun with a vitalist system, at least
Right.
as it's practiced in the US.
Yeah.
And so, I don't ever mean to give the impression that I have a hostility to, doctors, qua doctors. Like
Mhm.
I know many wonderful doctors. We together know many wonderful
Mhm.
doctors.
Yes, we
Um,
do.
we also know that this medical system that they are in is not serving or representing them either.
Right. No, I
And
think
I
there's a great deal of frustration with good
huge,
physicians right now,
huge.
at the corporatization and, how they've been subsumed by these giant machines, and the way they must practice just to make their living. And keep their licensure. I
Keep their
mean
licensure, yeah. And I mean, I'm on record saying that I would eliminate medical licensure. I said this in comment to Mary Bowden. I was like, and we weren't in a conversation. This was online,
Mhm.
social media, but you can't you can't sideline people like Mary Bowden
Mary Kelly Sutton and,
or
people.
Meryl or
Mhm.
any of these people if the licensure is like in my industry, we don't have licensure, we have certification.
Mhm.
And there are a couple of different internal certifications, and there are a couple that are very rigorous, and we have to police ourselves on that. And but also it means that our clients can evaluate us based not just on our credentials, but also on our reputations.
Mhm.
And there is no assumption that just because you have an MD, you are in the MD world, there's this assumption that if people have an MD, they have XYZ skills and all these things. And we know that's not true.
Mhm.
And what it means is that people, all these people we're talking about, can they can be severed from the people who need their help and their
Yes.
expertise. Like, I don't know the things that those MDs know. There's training they have that I don't have,
Mhm.
and they now can't do that, and this is an outrage. It's an
Yeah.
outrage.
No, I've, actually talked to a few MDs on this show who have lost their license because they made choices outside of what the system deemed, okay, and they were not choices that imperiled or put anyone in, harm's way at all. It was really, um to me, it seemed very sinister, and they just wanted to
Absolutely.
silence these doctors, which is a separate conversation. I wanna bring it back
Yeah,
to the homeopathy model.
absolutely.
So you have certification. Tell us, how long, like, how did you study? How were you certified?
Mhm,
What does that look like, the
mhm.
training and then your practice?
Right, and this is a great question because people get so interested in homeopathy, and they'll say, "How can I learn this?" And I'll say, "Well, how much time do you have?" Um, because there's learning it and there's learning it. There's learning to give a remedy at home when your child is sick, and then there's learning to do what I do, and then there is getting to the level of the practitioners that I study with who have 30, 40, 50 years in this field. So, in the minimum for certification in my industry with what I have, what's called a I have a CCH certification. There's another one now also that's a different board certification, but they're very similar. Um, they require a minimum of 500 didactic hours and a minimum of 500 supervised clinical hours. And then there are, but then there's, you have to do all your casework. And then there are the certification exams, and then there's continuing education. In my case, I have a lot more than that because even out of the gate, because I started at one school when in after I got out of the hospital, I said, I have to learn how to do this.
Mhm,
I started at one school and I went through a whole practitioner program there. That school closed during COVID because it was in person. So it no longer exists. But I went to
mm.
one school and I went through that complete program of all of their hours. But there was a industry drama, which I won't explain, but due to the vagaries of the certification process at that time, I then went basically through another whole program,
Wow.
not in exactly the same way.
Mhm.
But so I then graduated from another school, which
So it's
still
like a
exists.
do-over almost.
Kind of did a
Yeah.
do-over, which was fantastic
Well, you really
because
got it reinforced.
right, and, I think really because it really requires studying with so many different people to get the depth of this material. And then I do my continuing ed, and then I also, there's one it's not graduate studies because we don't have accreditation, but there's a post practitioner, program that you can do once you are established as a
Mm,
practitioner, that is run out of there's a fabulous homeopath named Jeremy Scher who runs that, so I've done this additional level of study, and so that whole process is probably oh gosh, I mean, soup to nuts, that process is probably 10 years, but I was
okay.
practicing, during
Along the
that
way,
time.
yeah.
And of course, in my supervised clinical, I was practicing earlier than that too. Uh, but what I wanna say about that is that I created this I created a course. I teach a course
Mhm.
that I call the Deep Dive Healing Club, but what it is that I think people learn in different ways, and they come to this subject material in different ways. But homeopathy is actually a worldview. To step into this way of thinking about understanding not just health and healing, but the whole cosmic experience, which right now seems to require a lot of understanding, uh,
Well,
is
it's completely incomprehensible, so
right,
I'm not sure we can even
right,
understand it.
but
I'm
I've
not
got
sure.
these principles.
Yeah. I don't know, the
So
people running this aren't not they are not like us, but
no,
anyway.
no, I am not even sure they put their pants on one leg at a time. I
No.
wonder if you can do
Mm.
that with tentacles. But, um, I realized that no matter where you come into the study, there are pieces that are required in order to make it enriching and make it land, especially when you're doing the nuts and bolts stuff. And if you want to just learn to use it as a home prescriber, which there's ways to do that, and it's totally legitimate to do that for acutes,
Mhm.
not for chronics, but for acutes. Uh, if people who think like I do, people who want to think deeply, they don't wanna be taught a plug and play approach. They wanna
Mhm.
actually understand, "Okay, but what's the theoretical framework that this sits in? How do I explain to people that I give them this and the cough goes away? I don't understand." So, I created essentially it's it's an enrichment program that can either you can study with me as a home prescriber, and you will get everything you need in order to use it at home with your kids. You can take this course as an active practitioner or as a student of homeopathy, and it adds this level of enrichment where I'm bringing in all of the things that I've had the benefit of studying. And it's just a really beautiful way to I have people that have taken that have joined that and then decided to go to homeopathy school.
Mm.
I have people who do that because it helps them understand their care better.
Mhm.
I have people who do that just because they wanna know how to take care of their kids, and I have people who do that because they just think it's fun and fascinating and wanna have this kind of conversation all the
Mhm.
time.
Yeah. Well, it's so different than the standard worldview, and I think what you say about, the enrichment of moving beyond the nuts and bolts, and I think that must make people a better practitioner, and it must make people better stewards of their own health too, because the plug and play thing works in a limited fashion for different disease states, but like anything chronic or ongoing, it has to be more complicated.
Mm.
Otherwise,
We
people
have it
would.
figured out.
Right, we wouldn't. I mean, even, profit motives aside,
Yeah,
we wouldn't have it.
right.
Like, if it were easily cured with a plug and play, we wouldn't have it. So in addition to this course, you
Mhm.
also have, a practice,
Yes.
and, tell us where we can find you for that and where we can, find things, and I'm also gonna link to the Coulter series
Yes.
in the thing. So, tell me where can people find you?
Okay.
Where are good places to start to move beyond this conversation?
Yes. My website is nodrughealth.com, nodrughealth.com, which links into Inner Sea Homeopathy, which is the name of my business. But since that's a hard one to spell, we go with nodrughealth.com.
Okay.
And that's where you can set up a free call with me. There's also the Deep Healing Club, just spelled just like it sounds, and that'll take you right to the portal. You can try that course for $1. Um, get full access to it. Um, I I have not yet, but I will as of this moment create a coupon code, Joni, Joni. So if people wanna take that course for the next few weeks, if anybody signs up for that course, they can use that code and you'll get a lifetime discount on the course.
Oh, how nice, and
So
we
I'll
are recording on March 26th, so if
yes.
people listen to this in a year, the code probably won't be there, so.
Right, but if you've listened to Joni and you're interested, reach out to me. Don't feel like if it's not on there, you can't use it. So let's have that conversation and you can let me know when this actually airs, and
Mhm.
then I'll make sure that the code is active for a window of time after that as well. So nodrughealth.com. If you from there you can find Deep Healing Club or you can find it online. I am active on, I guess we call it X now, as Big Healer underscore Sarah. You'll find me as Sarah the Homeopath.
Mhm.
I'm as active as I can be on Substack, where I'm also Sarah the Homeopath. And I think my at there is the big at large.
That's great.
So so I'm all of those places, but if you go to nodrughealth.com and you wanna try to find me, you can always book that Embark call and reach out to me. Um, it doesn't have to be because you wanna have a consultation. It can be because you wanna have a conversation about homeopathy and even find out if it's a fit or does it make sense or do you wanna study it. Definitely feel free to email me at Sarah at, nodrughealth.com.
And so you take patients, virtually then?
I do. I see people actually all over the world, but I say all over the country because it does depend on whether you can get remedies wherever you are.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
yeah, I'm based in Maine, but I can legally and ethically work all over the place, and I do.
Great. Well, this has been really wonderful. You're such a scholar, Sarah, and so articulate and so present. It's really been just a privilege to talk to you about this subject, and I'm so keen to learn more and
Yeah, this
try
is
it out
fun.
for some things. So I will be in touch.
Thanks so much, Joni. It's been
All
great.
right. Thanks, Sarah, and it's so good to see you.
Yeah, you too.
Okay. Bye bye.